In government, you had many highlights, you had many hard calls.
We can live our lives nowadays with less connection with others.
Stop talking and do it.
Opportunities arise if the timing's right.
Yep.
Have a crack. But if you play the game right, you establish relationships with your colleagues. Those individuals can't be left to wear the cost of big projects.
You've got to feel like you've done everything you possibly can to do the right thing. But it was very divisive in Toowoomba.
There are some people to this day who continue to dislike me. Some hate me. Support the team, to coach the team.
It's connecting so much of that together that the region actually needs.
He absolutely cleaned me up.
Hello everyone, my name's Graham Strain and I hope my younger self is listening. My guest today is a man who has farming roots in Allora and John Darien, a career in agribusiness, leadership in state and federal politics, and is now the Executive Director of TSBE, Toowoomba and Surat Basin Regional Enterprise.
Correct.
And Chancellor of UniSQ. Can you have much more to that? Welcome, John.
Thanks, Graham. Great to be here.
Yeah. So, if you haven't figured it out, we've got John McVeigh. Are you ready to get right into it?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. So, I'm going to start with growing up in regional Queensland, family to farm to Toowoomba city life. Give us a bit of an overview of you here, growing up and then ending up in the big smoke of Toowoomba.
Well, I was born 60 years ago this year in Allora, which my dear old dad still refers to as the centre of the universe, where he was born and where he grew up. As a baby, we shipped it out to John Darien, the family farm, and in the early 70s shifted into Toowoomba. So for many years, living in Toowoomba, where I went into grade 3 from memory, but back on the farm every weekend, so toing and froing. That was our life for many years. And then, of course, I'm the second youngest of 5, so as a family sort of got more involved in sport, and my older siblings from the farm went to boarding school, whereas I went to day school by the time we came into Toowoomba. The life became more and more Toowoomba-centric.
Do you miss the farm?
Yeah, I do actually. We sold, or Mum and Dad sold the farm, I should say, I don't know, at least 30 years ago. They worked hard to set we 5 children up in terms of our education and so forth. I think it kind of got to a stage by the time we saw them getting to retirement stage, we said, it's yours. You've set us up. We're all doing something else. But yeah, I probably would have liked to have done a bit more farming in my career.
Do you have a memory of the farm that sticks with you?
Absolutely. I remember clearly as a young kid being fascinated with the fact that Dad had a Kellogg's corn contract. So grew corn for Kellogg's.
Yep. And
I was fascinated when I learnt that was what went in the Kellogg's cornflakes packet sitting on the table. And I think I've mentioned to you a number of times, Graham, that my personal, professional, political, academic career, you name it, has been very much focused on agribusiness, as it's turned out over the years. And I put it way back to then, a kid sort of trying to make a connection between what was on our kitchen table and what was in the paddock outside. So it's always fascinated me, that what we call the supply chain or the value chain in agribusiness.
So how did he manage to learn something like that?
Fairly common at the time for good quality, farming regions like the Central Darling Downs out here on the Darling Downs.
Not as much anymore, as I would assume.
Well, it's changed. That farm was an 800-acre dryland farm. That's now part of a bigger operation, less people living there. Same story throughout the bush.
I think that's almost Australia-wide, isn't it?
Exactly.
So, did your parents get into the community much as well? Like working, there's obviously the farm life, there's living in Toowoomba. It's almost like 2 different communities that would have been involved in.
To a certain extent, we shifted into Toowoomba because my father went into federal politics after he'd spent a fair bit of time in, I guess, what you'd call agri-politics, so the then state week board and all those sorts of things. So, the farm was certainly within his electorate. So it was more just moving around the Darling Downs in a broader community, but seeing it from different angles, I guess.
I've always been fascinated by the politics. My memory as a kid is basically standing at I think it was the school in Winton, whether with my grandmother or dad or someone standing on the national stand. It was Winton, so nationals.
Yes, yeah.
I think I was enrolled to vote when I was born. But then watching Dad's great mate standing on the Labor stand,
Yep.
about the only bloke in Winton
Yep.
voting for Labor. I think it was the Shearers, that was about it. And how good natured it all was.
Yep.
And then you fast forward to this year's election, which wasn't anywhere as good natured.
I'd agree.
I think everyone's still trying to get over that.
I'd agree.
Did the early politics interest you?
I was interested in, the art of politics and what was going on in politics, simply because our family was involved, I guess.
Yeah.
But in terms of a job or a career or an opportunity for me, it's not something that I'd considered in my early years, in the 20s and so forth. But that sort of evolved later in life.
Later we'll have a whole big discussion about it. What helped shape your views of the world back then? Because obviously you had two very different views between farm and Toowoomba, even though Toowoomba was probably still a big country town then.
Sure.
You got some notes here around family and church in rural Queensland. You expand on that a bit for me?
I guess as a kid, what I can recall is being exposed to more than what was in our own backyard, so to speak, and not unusual. As one of the younger ones of a family in regional Queensland that had the opportunity, my parents had the opportunity through hard work to send their kids to boarding school. So my older sister Marg and my two older brothers Tom and Michael went to boarding school in Brisbane. So cruising around on the farm, following Dad, following Mum, coming into Toowoomba before we shifted into Toowoomba. Yep. For example, going to Coles New World beside the old Myers down there, for example.
Yep.
That was a weekly shopping trip. I can remember those sorts of things. But equally jumping in the car on weekends and going to Brisbane to see my older siblings and being exposed to so much more than just what was on in our own backyard.
So did you feel robbed that they got boarding school and you got day school? Or did you think you won?
I think they had the opportunity to get away with a fair bit more than I did. But I probably ate better than they did through those years.
If boarding school food, what it was like for me in the 80s and 90s, absolutely. Chocolate blancmange. That's a whole other story. Going on from that, the community roots for you, we've got a sentence here called evolution of service, and it's about, help. Did your parents go help with or parents-in-law with kids' sports, fates, those sorts of things?
Mum and Dad were always very engaged in the community and very fortunate. They're both in their 90s. Dad's just turned 95. Mum is 92 and a half. So very fortunate that they're still around to talk to and get advice from, and often whether you want it or not. But yeah, like I think their own upbringing by necessity. Dad in Alra, Mum in Clifton. As kids, they didn't know each other then, obviously. You're automatically involved in the community. My father's of the age where he and his brothers would either ride or walk to school, obviously, and community was your only source of entertainment. So that grew, and they instilled that in us. And again, that's a very, very common story across regional Queensland.
Well, and look, it's a very common story. Talk about volunteers and community and everything now. I mean, I grew up with my grandparents and my parents that you manned every barbecue, you're always together, there's tennis days, those sorts of things. Yeah. Whereas you go to Bunnings now and you look at most of those sausage sizzles, and the average age in there is probably older than 60. It's
absolutely, you see that every weekend.
Absolutely.
I'm declaring the fact that I go to Bunnings most weekends.
I'm declaring the fact I go there too.
But yeah, it is It is, and we hear so much of that, don't we? That losing the volunteer effort, needing to celebrate that volunteer workforce.
Do you think there's a way to change that?
I don't know.
Neither.
I think we can live our lives nowadays with less connection with others. That's the reality. I think that's unfortunate. There are benefits post-COVID of being able to work in remote locations, and all that's great. But we've got to be careful that as we adjust, and I think we're still adjusting, we don't lose that connection. So
the classic case is you would think about living in Toowoomba when you were Nova's age, so forth. You knew your neighbours' names, virtually what they had for breakfast.
Of course.
Had dinner with them. I can tell you that our neighbours either side, whom I wave at them, one's a rental and that changes reasonably regularly.
Yep.
I don't know their names. The other one is a nice fellow who has been beside us for 7 or 8 years, and he and I have biannual conversations when we need to, usually over a plant hanging over a fence, and that's it.
Yeah.
Don't know any more about them.
Isn't it fascinating you saying that? I can remember when we shifted into Toowoomba when I was a kid, we lived behind Centenary Heights State High School. And I remember there was Mr. and Mrs. Woods next door, there was Faye and Margaret the other side, Mr. Rogers across the road, Kenneth Oakes down the road, the Royals on the corner. And that was all when I was in primary school.
Yeah.
Here I am remembering it really clearly now. I can't remember I don't have that sort of clarity about every place we've lived since.
No.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's what ties into that volunteer thing for me. I think you can live so, recluse is the wrong word, but you can live so offset to everyone because you can stream everything, you can catch up with everyone by doing that. It's actually hard to have catch-up conversations with people sometimes because you've already seen it scroll past you on the screen.
Yeah.
That's where I think the volunteer thing is getting harder. You look at all the sporting clubs, look at the committees, we see it in left, right and centre. It's even the load on small businesses getting asked to some more support community groups.
Yeah.
It's probably a whole other conversation, to be really honest.
It is. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the coming decades. Like, I'm older than you, obviously, but what are people like you and I going to be doing as we move towards retirement? And I do see, volunteering as a big part of that.
Yeah.
Big part of that that equation, if you like, not only for satisfaction, mental health, engagement, but obviously for the good of the community as well.
Leaving our wives alone.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
Entering politics. So you were talking about your agribusiness side of things, and you were consulting to the Toowoomba Regional Council. How did you end up consulting to TRC?
Well, I was consulting at a agribusiness management consulting practice for some years with some colleagues. It was a really enjoyable period of my professional life. And we were consulting to a group of irrigators across the Darling Downs, which had us working with Toowoomba would have been Toowoomba City Council then. Wombo, Dalby Town Council, John Darien, Pittsworth, Millmerran, to a certain extent, Clifton, Cambodia, you name it. So I was working with them rather than for them,
And the amalgamation, which was just that, it all happened just before I got here.
Okay.
Or came back, I should say. It was my second lap at Toowoomba. Did you have much involvement around that?
Again, I was just observing it. And by the time of the amalgamation in 2008, I was involved in consulting activities across the Downs, which had me in touch with councils. So I was observing this amalgamation with great interest. And of course, kids' sporting clubs and school boards and you name it, you're starting to look at what's happening with sporting grounds around town, what are the decisions that councils make, et cetera, et cetera. So I observed it, and what I know, having grown up on the Downs, is that it was, for our region, a pretty big deal. 8 councils came together, so it was the biggest number of councils in an amalgamation in the whole state. So, that wasn't without some pain for a whole range of communities.
I was in Roma when it happened, and Bungle Shire and everyone coming in, and even Roma in that smaller location, it was interesting.
Yep.
Good and bad, but just people's take on it all.
Well, here in Toowoomba, I found it interesting. to see that Millmerran Shire Council and John Darien Shire Councils had, in only the few years leading up to amalgamation, invested in what are beautiful council chambers and community centres.
Yeah.
Probably still the best in the region, I would argue. But a couple of years later, bang, not used as council chambers, used as meeting rooms.
Yeah.
And that was about it.
So I've got a sentence here that says, stop talking and do it. I'm assuming that has something to do with state and federal politics.
It has a fair bit to do with my wife, Anita. So in late 2008, we're busy with our family, all kids at school. I was busy with my consulting activities. Anita was busy as a part-time teacher, so as we've raised our kids, she's sort of returned to teaching from time to time regularly throughout her career. And sad passing of Councillor Ian Orford, who'd only just been elected in 2008. He passed away during the 2008 year. There was essentially a by-election for that position, and having been interested and been a commentator from the sidelines, you name it, Anita basically said to me, have a go, get it out of your system. And
Because you'd obviously voiced it, you had an interest in it, maybe do I, don't I?
I was approached. I can recall a couple of people, including the then Mayor, Peter Taylor, came around to our house one night and said, hey, John, how about it? So that was an encouragement, but ultimately these sorts of things are your own decision, whether you're going to commit or not. Again, we didn't want to go too far in terms of politics while our kids were young. So it was always a bit of an interest, but we were busy doing what we were doing, and the opportunity arose. And I guess for me, when I talk to people about politics, Graham, I often say that in my humble opinion, it's not a career. You don't sort of come out of school or university or whatever and say, one day I want to be a politician. I know some people operate that way, but in my view, opportunities arise if the timing's right, have a crack, but you can't really plan out that career. I can't tell you, if you do these things, you're guaranteed to be Prime Minister in 10 years' time.
Look at the amount of potential wonderful Prime Ministers that didn't make it through an election.
Correct.
Comes down to the guy in charge before you and what the wipeout or whichever it looks like. The swing.
And that affects any side or level or form of politics.
So in making the decision, obviously you need to go and do it. Did you have to look at your family and go, this is going to take a large amount of my time. Is this going to pull me away? Can I do it?
Obviously.
Yeah.
Obviously, we weighed all of that up. We had a couple of very simple business interests at the time, and you're certainly able to declare that and maintain that. Not ones that involved me many hours a week or anything like that, but you can do that. So we wanted to sort of get that balance right. But I stepped back from consulting, devoted myself to this. And for us, again, it was about the kids. They were young, playing sport, going to a couple of different schools, primary school and secondary school. And part of it for me was figuring, well, hang on, if I'm racing around following after them, which is my priority, our priority, I'm engaging in the community. If they're playing, son Kevin, for example, as a little fella, used to play the occasional soccer tournament in Oakey, for example, a little bit of rugby league in Pittsworth. So you're moving around the community that is the Toowoomba region anyway, so it fitted us in that sense.
Good. In government, you had many highlights, you had many hard calls, you had some extremely proud moments. Range crossing, UniSQ grain research. Tell me about a few of them and why they make you proud.
Well, you get the opportunity when you go into politics to, if you play the game right, in my humble opinion, plenty of people out there, Graham, who would disagree with me. But if you play the game right, you establish relationships with your colleagues on both sides of the house or any party, if you like. And you can have the angle of working to the benefit of your own electorate. And you are elected, certainly in Queensland, which has one House of Parliament, not the two, and federally in the lower house, as a representative of your electorate.
Yep.
That's your title. You're a member of the House of Representatives. You could talk about the federal parliament. So that was always featured very strongly in my mind. You're representing. So if you've got that mindset and you work with whoever's in power, ministers, you name it, and have that core, you can really achieve some great outcomes. So I was very proud in state politics. Admittedly, I was Minister for Agriculture at the time, but we were able to identify that grains research for the state of Queensland needed to sort of be relocated and refocused.
Yep.
We brought that out to UniSQ, and it's gone, it's really powered ahead. So that's been a great
And their
achievement.
shirts look great too.
Indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know the guy who does them, but
But the fact that we have world-class grains research, not only on the university campus, but at a property out at Brookstead or Pampas called Tassari, which is a commercial scale property, originally farmed by Ubergang family.
Yeah.
That is still a grains research, cotton research property, where it's not small plot divorced from reality stuff,
Yeah.
which has a space in research, particularly for plant breeding, for example, but it's large scale. This is what the real farmer next door is engaged in. So I was really proud to be able to get a focus on real world research, and that stands to this day.
the range crossing must have been an undertaking of undertakings.
It was, and whilst I was the federal member when the ribbon was cut, so I was able to stand beside the then Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack, very good friend of mine, who was a Minister for Infrastructure, and the State Minister at the time, Mark Bailey, State Minister for Transport and Main Roads, a good guy as well. So a National Party federal fellow and a Labor state fellow, and cut the ribbon. I'd really only been there for 5 minutes. It was Ian McFarlane who'd done all the hard yards prior to me.
Yeah.
But as I said to him, mate, you talked about this for years, and I'm elected 5 minutes, and we do it. But
Job done. Thank you.
All jokes aside, to see the work that went into that at both levels of politics over many years was impressive, but it took way too long.
Yeah. I can still remember the tunnel that they'd cut through that no one really knew existed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember watching some video footage. I never got to walk down it, but I watched the video footage of someone wearing a GoPro who walked through it.
Yes.
It was actually one of those really cool things.
Yes.
That would have been a tourist attraction.
Indeed, I walked up to the opening of it a number of times, to the hole in the ground or the hole in the side of the hill. But yeah, I didn't walk through it either.
No. So that's all the fun, good stuff. But you had lots of there was the challenges behind the scenes that that probably people don't hear about. Do you want to expand on a couple of what some of the things that behind the scenes was really tough?
Yeah, there were a few tough aspects, as any representative. Again, I'll stress that word. You're a representative of your region would encounter. There's some passing lanes on the Warrego Highway between Toowoomba and Oakey that needed upgrading after a horrific accident there. A couple of people killed not so many years ago. The work that went into simply getting a couple of passing lanes put in, it's the turn-off for a lot of people coming from the west to shoot across to Wellcamp Airport. The bureaucracy, even though the decision had been made, it took some years for it to actually happen. That's frustrating.
Yeah, I was about to say, how do you deal with that frustration? Because I'm assuming you must nearly bang the table a couple of times.
Well, you do bang the table. I was fortunate that Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack was supportive of me looking at all sorts of ways that we could do it. Federal government gives money to the state government to do it, which is fair enough. They've got the gear, they've got the department. But they would say, well, that's in next year's budget, or it's in the forwards. It'll be a couple of years down the track. We wanted it done now. And I said, well, can I see if council can be subcontracted to do it, or a contractor do it for state government quickly. And we learned, unfortunately, we couldn't push any harder, any more quickly, given how the system works. But that was frustrating. Even though you'd got the money, got the commitment, tick, it was some years before it actually happened. We weren't building a freeway here.
No.
We're just simply building a passing lane and a painted traffic island in the middle of the road.
And I'm assuming that, and this is just assuming, I'm assuming with the people who were killed, there was families you had spoken to going, I'm going to do something about this.
Exactly, particularly the neighbours who came out in the middle of that night to a scene of carnage and absolute tragedy. They were the ones who were campaigning with me.
Man, and that's some of the stuff that why I never ended up in politics, because you've got to be look them in the eye and say, I've done everything I can, but and then you're still not really giving an answer.
Well, exactly. You can give them updates, but it's things like that. It's particularly the matters that will always remain private with people, between yourself and people that you worked with on fairly tragic family circumstances. That was hard going. Satisfying when you could get an outcome and they were able to sort of, they invited you to celebrate with them, whether that was just to meet and chat or have a cup of tea or whatever. It's very satisfying, very humbling, equally frustrating for those whom you couldn't find a legal solution. So, a mix of challenges, that's for sure.
How did you find the inland rail process?
Well, Inland Rail continues to this day. I think the environmental impact statement for border to Gowrie across the Darling Downs basically is out for comment. I think it's the end of this month that we have to, anyone who's interested, and I say we on behalf of TISB, have to submit comment. So the debate continues, but you just have to do your research.
Yep.
You have to find the facts. You have to consult people and get as many views as you can, even from those who ultimately hate your guts because you haven't been able to stop something or whatever. And if you can do that, and you can, it's that old saying, if you can do that and lie straight in bed at night and sleep well, you know you've done everything you can. So that's how I approached it. Recognising big infrastructure projects like that promise tremendous benefit to the broader community, the broader economy, but they have an impact on individuals.
Yeah.
So those individuals can't be left to wear the cost of big projects. They need to be compensated, or there needs to be some mitigation, looked after, whatever it is, whether they stay on their properties or move.
And I'm assuming that's when you talk about the lying straight, that's where your integrity comes into it, because you've got to feel like you've done everything you possibly can to do the right thing.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I'm a positive person by nature. I believe everyone has integrity until they prove you wrong. And it's only a very few people in this world, when you sum it up, in terms of people you all engage with, who don't, have the level of integrity that you would expect, or that you know people expect of you. So most people are like that.
And that is the world. And my parents brought me up on you trust till they break it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, representing Toowoomba and the regional advocacy, that's a sentence. In your mind, what makes Toowoomba unique?
Well, Toowoomba, and I'm going to go back and answer a bit more of your previous question as I talk about this, Graham. I'm sorry to take over the program here. So Toowoomba is unique because it's such a diversified economy. So if ag's down, energy, whether it's coal or gas, whether it's renewables now, tend to be up, and you would see that in your business. We've got a few levers a few irons in the fire, I should say, in terms of what our economy does. On top of that, we're fortunate that we basically have a catchment of southern inland Queensland, northern inland New South Wales, which means a lot for education. It means a lot for health. So we've got such a robust economy. That's a real feature for us. We're that channel from the west into Brisbane, etc.
I have a joke that COVID couldn't get past Whitcott, so the economy was all right.
I'd agree with that, and I think we have been exposed to the world at large over generations. more than people give us credit for. And what I mean by that is, not far from your shop here is a building that was the old barley marketing board of Queensland back in the day, or statutory bodies. Yep. So the barley marketing board used to, it had statutory, powers, and that's all been done away with. But they would market Queensland barley crop internationally, into the Middle East, throughout Asia. So for generations, we've been dealing with other cultures, other people, and I think people forget that, such that we're a far more open society than many people think, or broad, if I can put it that way. And I reflect back on the marriage equality debate when I was in federal politics. People said to me, here in the seat of Groom, Toowoomba and the Darling Downs, and externally, hey John, it'll be easy for you. You won't have to make a call, because Toowoomba is that conservative, that much of a church city. Not that there's anything wrong with that. The vote in what ended up being a voluntary vote in your region will be 99% against changing the Marriage Act, and 1% for.
And couldn't have been further away from it.
I said to people, and I'm on record saying this, it'll be 50-50, 50-50. It came in, I've got to remember my stats again now, it came in 50.8% against changing. So it was basically 50,
yeah,
50,
you flip a coin on it.
Which meant then that, hang on, this is not an easy call for me in representing the electorate.
Yep.
That's what I took an oath on the floor of the federal parliament to do. So I was fair dinkum about that oath. I'm not saying bloody oath. I'm saying
you can say whatever you want. We're not.
So I had to go into the community. I need to talk to church leaders. I need to talk to young people. I need to talk to people, farmers here in town. My Anita and my own beliefs are not secret. By the same token, we keep them to ourselves. So, I spent a fair bit of time with my bishop, bishop of the Catholic diocese, just talking through all of this stuff, and other people. And I made a call to not oppose the change, because I thought, in balance, that's what my electorate was asking me to do.
And in the end, I think you're very right. It was even my age group. I'm probably the next gen down from you. It was in Toowoomba was very split. And I come from Winton and Western Queensland,
sure.
Which the further you went that way, the more I went to know. That's a very true statement. But it was very divisive in Toowoomba. And for a voluntary vote, once again, you're talking about bumpy politics. It was bumpy because. Yes. Because we are traditionally white. So I call it the white Western Queensland syndrome. It was like watching, but Tila's being 10 years younger for me, even her age group, that was a big yes, but mine was a very 50-50 because we were brought up.
Yep.
In the end, I was like you, I didn't oppose it because in the end it just made sense.
Well, it made sense to me because that's what my electorate told me, and I put the effort in.
Yeah.
And people, it's a pity, it's part of politics. There are some people to this day who continue to dislike me. Some hate me as a result of that, and that's sad. And I hope they get through that one day. But the test for me, as throughout my whole political career, is how are you judged at the end by your electorate.
Yep.
And I'm proud of the fact that I went into the next election, even though people said I was done and dusted as a result of that, and I won the highest Liberal Party margin in the entire country. So my team and I did, sorry. So I remain very proud of that, and it was justification. Must have called it right. You represent the electorate, and you've got to put your effort into working out what they're telling you.
And look, I don't envy you having to make decisions like that, because I can make my own decision. Jack and Nicole can, breaking the fourth wall as usual. But we can do that at home. You had to sit in front of a newspaper, a TV crew camera, and say what you thought. And that's probably some of the other side people don't get to see, is that that would have had its own toll on you at home. You know, did I do the right thing? Did I do the right thing?
Sure.
You know, even though you were comfortable with it, I know you would have agonised.
But you know, that's the gig. You've got to make a call.
So, life after politics. You know, you had to step back from politics, and as we talked earlier, you know, there are some things changed in your world, and I'll let you expand on that as much as you're comfortable. Talk me through that period.
So the period obviously involved a fair bit of counsel within our own family. By the time I stepped out of federal politics, and I stepped out mid-term, which prompted a by-election. I'd done that previously when I changed to state politics, but did it at a time where there was no need for a by-election. So that's a serious consideration. Long story short, my wife, Anita, who is in excellent health nowadays, had a history of dealing with a range of health challenges. And I'll see how I go tonight, Graham, when I get home and tell her I told you this.
But there is a spare bed at home.
It's not a secret amongst our friends and family. Equally, it's not something you go singing from the rooftops. But Anita suffered from a reasonably rare condition called pseudomyxoma peritonei. And what that means, Anita describes it as a form of appendix cancer. Whatever it is, I only say that because I'm not the expert. It was low-grade sort of tumours throughout the abdomen. And sooner or later you have to do something with that. She had a very big operation to deal with that when I was in the federal ministry. She encouraged me to continue with politics through that period, but complications following that was such that we were heading to Canberra one January on holidays, where I'd offered to help the Speaker chair an international meeting of parliamentarians. Yep. So it's on holidays, but I thought, no, we'll go down. We thought we'd have a driving holiday and visit friends on the way. We got to Sydney. She had another attack of this condition, or the complications from it. We spent 2 weeks in St Vincent's and Darlinghurst in Sydney.
I think that's right, yeah.
Whatever that suburb is. It's not exactly the place you want to spend 2 weeks. The hospital itself was great, but the environs are a bit challenging. So I couldn't go to Canberra, had to take some time off, drove her back home as soon as she could drive because she couldn't fly. And the kids sort of sat down with us and said, Dad, what are you doing? So that led us to make the decision and look at opportunities outside politics. And long story short, that led me to the university.
And you've done a fantastic job there. Everyone tells me so.
Ongoing assessment.
Ongoing assessment. Okay, we'll call it that. How did it take you long to make that decision once you got home? I know the kids sat you down, but I know you and Anita would have talked extensively. Yeah,
to be honest, it was a decision sort of, and that incident in Sydney was very much a catalyst during this period, but a decision that we probably thought about for a good 6 months.
Yeah.
By that stage, I'd been in politics for 12 months. 12 years, I should say. Admittedly, 4 years local, 4 years state, 4 years federal. I was continuing to get pre-selected and elected and so forth. Everyone has their time.
Used by date.
That's the word, thank you. So that comes for all of us sooner or later, but I was always determined to have another career after politics, and the stars aligned for us, and here we are.
How did you manage your own personal well-being in all this? Because you must have been under some own personal immense pressure, because politics comes with its own pressure in itself, but then you're adding this on top. You must have had some quiet moments where you're just trying to work out how to do it. Yes,
obviously. And with with a big family, you get to switch off and spend time with your kids. And, during this period, they were starting to bring partners, subsequently their life partners, home, so you would start to engage in a whole new phase of life, which has been an enormous pleasure for Anita and I, only topped by the next generation, so a couple of grandkids now. So I had that escape, I guess. I'm pretty simple. My personal interests are around old Ford motor cars, so not many of them run well, but I tinker with them. Used to tinker with them only a little bit, get the opportunity to tinker with them more nowadays.
Do you have a couple at home?
I have 7 at home.
Do you have a favourite?
That's like trying to ask you to pick your favourite child.
I'll tell your kids.
But a 67 ZA Fairlane 289 cubic inch V8 is up there, perfectly original.
Does it run well?
Not at the moment, but normally it does, and I've got to get something checked out. But during that period, and interestingly enough, it was during COVID. Our consideration was during COVID, and Anita, being somewhat immune compromised, prompted me to drive to Canberra, which many members were doing from across Australia, rather than jump on aeroplanes. And to answer your question, it was during a number of those long drives in my XR8 Falcon, where I jump in the car, you take off here on a Sunday afternoon, try and get to Narrabri, sleep there, and then through to Canberra the next day, ready for Monday afternoon meetings. There was nowhere to eat other than McDonald's or other fast food outlets, so you couldn't go out anywhere. And I thought, I've got plenty of music to listen to, and you name it, to while away my Sunday afternoon in particular. I jumped in the car for at least 2 or 3 of those trips in total silence, the whole way down and the whole way back. And I thought I'd jump in the car, and I thought, I'll just think about a few things before I get to Millmerran. And I didn't switch anything on. And of course, most of that, thankfully, you're out of telephone range or mobile reception is patchy. And I just didn't end up switching the radio or CD or anything on, and I just
drove.
Actually settled into it. And that helped me work through and sort out the challenges on a couple of return trips.
Amazing. Like, I struggle with silence.
Yeah, well, I do too.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just settled into the silence, and that helped me work it all out.
If you had to give someone some advice who would go through something similar, would you have a thought for someone who's feeling that kind of pressure around family and work life?
I think for me, what I learned out of that episode was that was a form of meditation, essentially, for me. I was keeping my eyes on the road, don't worry. But even, driving, paying attention to that and the rest being silent, that's an escape.
Yeah.
You've got to keep an eye on those trucks coming the other way, and, who's passing you, who's doing that, the speed limits as you go into towns, et cetera, et cetera. So focused on that was a bit of an escape in its own right, let alone the silence that accompanied it. That was a form of meditation for me. And however you meditate or get time on your own or reflection, whatever you call it. I know plenty of friends make time to meditate each day. I'm probably not disciplined enough to, but that was meditation for me, as is nowadays, getting out on the range bypass and going for a cruise in one of my old cars.
As long as they're running well.
As long as they're running well, and most of them don't have radio, so that's an added bonus.
That's fantastic. So, TSBE. Now, I'm with Hip Pocket. We're one of the original Surat Basin members when Breezy used to send us the spreadsheets and everything. Recently, you've taken on TSBE almost like a passion project. Talk me through wanting to take that on and really get TSBE's energy and platform back on track.
Yeah, sure, Graham. So I sat on Toowoomba Regional Council as a councillor when the then Mayor Peter Taylor had established an Economic Development Advisory Board. And long story short, that board, which had the likes of John Wagner, John Minns, who was the CEO of Heritage Bank at the time, Bobby Brazel, who was a predecessor of mine as Chancellor of the University of Southern Queensland, and a number of other, well-known local business people, morphed into what was Toowoomba Enterprise to start with. That group advised council, hang on, we need to take this thing out of council, set it up separately, liaise with council, but engage with community and stand on our own 2 feet. And as you'd be aware, it subsequently merged with Surat Basin Enterprise, hence TSBE. So that's what, 12, 13 years ago or more. So I observed it right back at the start. Through my other roles, particularly in politics, obviously I've liaised with TSBE over the years. And when I stepped out of politics, the then chair, Shane Charles, asked me to join the board, which, working for the university, I had to seek approval for. And our former Vice-Chancellor, who's the CEO of the university, Geraldine McKenzie, said to me, hey, John, she said, I think that's a good idea because I'm on the board and you can take my spot. So I went on and took her spot.
Laid plans.
I subsequently was asked to be chair, and I was for the last few years. When I stepped out of the university last year, when I was asked to become Chancellor, which is sort of a part-time role, sort of a chair of the board kind of role, I had time on my hands. And the board of TSBE, long story short, had a conversation and said, hey, McVeigh, you can step into an executive leadership role. Yes, I'm executive director of TSBE nowadays, which fills up well and truly the rest of my week. Great friend of mine and now chair, April Kavanagh, she'd filled the role for 12 months, so she was stepping out and I had the opportunity to step in.
And did a magnificent job.
Absolutely. So TSBE, as I think most people realise, started off with a hell of a bang. Under the tremendous leadership, I must say, of John Wagner, Shane Charles, the original board, charter jet from Wellcamp, Qantas charter into China, looking at export markets. They were really heady, exciting days.
I've still got my award from back then that was made out of their composite fibre.
Yes.
With a little plaque on the end.
Yeah. I was in state politics by this stage, and I couldn't leave the state. I couldn't join that trip, but really would have loved to have. So TSBE launched coal seam gas boom. How do we work to get that balance right? TSBE nowadays is about ag, it's about energy. Nowadays that's renewables as much as it is gas and other. It's about education, it's about health as key parts of our economy. So I'm relishing the opportunity, I've been there for the last 6 months, to step back in, to use any experience I've got to support the team. And you work with a few of them, Graham, Dan and co. And my objective is, given that TSBE is in a different phase now, it's no longer those heady days right back at the start, and there's different opportunities, and there's Olympics, and there's pumped hydro projects, you name it. My focus in my time at TSBE over the coming years is to support the team, to coach the team. I think any organisation like ours isn't sustainable, if I can put it that way, if it ends up being about one person, the person at the front. I'm relishing the opportunity to get behind my team.
Oh, look, and I think it's vitally important. You talk about, it's part of our chat, is the regional growth and development. I think TSBE is a phenomenally large part of that. You look at the events we go to from basically Roma to here to Brisbane, that it's connecting so much of that together that the region actually needs. The Surat Basin, if we're not plugging them all into each other, the bits won't work.
I agree, but it's an ongoing challenge. And as I said, we're moving into a different phase now. And some of our original members are cranky with us because we don't do what we used to do. I've got to get my head around that. Of course, I'm trying to get them back on board and to stay with us, but also learn from that. Some of our newer members are absolutely thrilled. Our membership base throughout the years has remained much the same, but We just got to keep updating because, expansive or the expansion of the wind farm, renewable energy sector, solar, pumped hydro, as I mentioned, if I just use energy examples, they weren't issues not so many years ago. We have to grapple with it now. Restrictions on trade with the US, with tariffs and so forth, are an issue now for our beef industry. They weren't only a few years ago. We have to deal with it now.
Well, look, it's basically understanding your supply chain and helping those members, because the supply chain is changing. I know what I do here, and you've just got to be nimble because it can change. There's more than one Trump in the world. And
absolutely.
And I don't mean that negatively. It's just that he's got a plan for America, and that doesn't really involve much of Australia.
There's a saying, and my kids get sick of me saying this. You got to realise we are where we are, and in terms of those dynamics, that's where we are now. We're not 12 years ago. We're not 12 years in the future. We have to deal with it now with an eye to the future. So, I was thrilled, and you and Tila were there, Graham, at the Roma Enterprise evening we had not so many weeks ago, where the Mayor of Maranoa, Wendy Taylor, great lady, and of course the CEO of the Port of Brisbane were talking with one voice about this supply chain that is railway lines to the west, let alone what inland rail might be in the future, the Warrego Highway, for energy, for ag. We've got to understand what this physical supply chain is now and in the future, whether you live at the Port of Brisbane or you live, Roma or further west.
It's only going to get busier.
Exactly.
We could do a whole other episode on that. Yeah. But it is, and getting your average person to also understand why all this is so important, because in the end it comes back to their table, their wage, food on table, lights on. If we don't get this right, we're in.
Something I learnt when I was a kid. Dad grew corn that went into the Kellogg's cornflakes box. Now it went interstate to be manufactured into cornflakes.
Look, it's just.
But what did that supply chain look like?
Yeah, I bet you it's extremely different now.
Precisely.
Normally. I have a section in here where it's called, which is actually a call the hard way, and a lot of it's around leadership and things you've learnt. If you could pick a mistake you've made in leadership and making moves, what would it be?
So leadership, I can, because it was, depending on how long ago, it's at least a quarter of my working life, the time that I spent in politics. I can reflect on how the game is played.
Yep.
And it's not a game, it's serious business. You're representing your electorate.
Yeah.
In my humble opinion, politicians across the board sometimes fall into the trap of forgetting that they represent their electorate.
Yeah.
They're not someone who works in Brisbane or Canberra and occasionally visits home. They're someone who lives at home and occasionally visits Brisbane or Canberra. So with that in mind, I'll admit I got sucked into playing the game from time to time.
Yep.
And it's that old adage that we all know only too well. You've got to play the ball, not the man.
Yeah.
And I learnt that lesson, thankfully, reasonably early in my political career, but it's an important message for all of us, no matter what we're dealing with. And it's a way to sort of look after yourself as well, not get too angry with individuals that you might be dealing with.
Because they're probably trying to play the same game you are on the other side. And
I have a classic example. In fact, it was the key lesson for me. 2015, early 2015, as Minister for Agriculture, an election campaign here in Queensland, an election that my side lost. I was encouraged to get on and debate the opposition spokesman for agriculture on the Country Hour.
Yep.
And I think it was Craig Zonka on ABC who did that show. He now does the morning program in Brisbane. And even he said to me online prior to the debate, he said, "Oh, John, all the best with this, but you're across it. I think you'll win this one easily."
Yeah.
People would say that to me right across the state. The opposition spokesman was a bloke who's become a very good friend of mine, Anthony Lynham, Dr. Anthony Lynham. Long story short, Graham, I got caught up in the moment.
Yep.
And I got to beat this bloke, was what I was being told. And you will beat him, because you're across it and they're not much good at agriculture and you know what you're doing, John. He absolutely cleaned me up by being cool, calm, collected and respectful to me and not getting sucked into the, let's have a Barney on radio. A key lesson, and I'm really pleased that he remains a very good friend of mine.
I find it slightly amusing because you see it happen all the time. And that's why I like people like Wayne Bennett and that sort of stuff, because they're absolute masters at sucking you in to have a big crack. Absolutely come into my parlour,
Yep.
And it's just fascinating hearing it, just even being told by someone like you with all your experience that you are caught up in it.
Yep. Yeah, Anthony taught me a big lesson, and it was a good lesson.
If you have some advice to your younger self, so if you go back to you before you get into all of this, even before you've had kids, could you tell yourself something that would give you some advice?
I guess anyone who's got a bit of experience can share advice. I stress it's based on a personal experience. It may not suit everyone, but it is based on experience. So what I've learnt is you've got to make time for yourself, particularly when you're busy. And I've always enjoyed being busy, and so many people that I know and associate with, including yourself, enjoy being busy. But amongst all of that, work, professional life, community stuff, neighbours, friends, family, partner, which brings it back to the core in my mind, you've still got to make time for yourself. And for me, just being able to enjoy a bit of solitude. There's nothing like catching up with your mates at the pub, which unfortunately I don't get to do much nowadays. But that's great. But you've also got to make time for yourself. And a lot of religious commentators, faith commentators from any denomination or any faith tradition that you can think of will often say that yourself and your own relationships is a core. So that's it for me. That's the building block, because otherwise I'm no good to Anita or the kids who receive my advice nowadays, whether they like it or not.
It's an age thing when you get to that. Well, you can all hear it whether you like it or not.
And it's great to be able to say, hang on, you asked me for my advice. The problem in asking me for my advice is I'll give it. You asked for it.
I say it all the time. I said, I'll give you advice. What you do with it is up to you.
Exactly.
We're now on to the book of questions.
Right.
So in this book, there's a question for you to read that was written by our last guest, which is Dale from Greengrass.
Yes.
You get to read it. Give us your response. And make sure you read it out loud. If you're from around here, chances are you've had something embroidered, print or pressed by us. And if you haven't, come look us up.
Who is someone who would have no idea that they have had a large impact on your life? Whether a chance meeting or a family member who has had an outsized impact. My mind, and there's many people have had an impact on my life, and I've talked extensively about my family, particularly my wife Anita, number one impact on my life. And she's still with me 38 years later, so there you go. But a chance meeting, my mind goes to the late great Uncle Darby McCarthy, a Indigenous leader in our part of the world who passed away a few years ago. A bloke who was a renowned jockey, international jockey in his younger days, etc., etc. But I was with him at a function. I think I was in state politics at the time. And it was at a time when there was conversation in the community about reconciliation. Yeah. Indigenous affairs, First Nations relationships, that sort of focus. And it was top of mind. And I was having a chat with Uncle Darby, who I didn't know well at that time. And he was reflecting on it. He was talking about his work with young incarcerated Indigenous men, particularly in Brisbane. And he had such positivity despite the challenges that he was dealing with. And I'm going to quote him, so pardon my language, not that it's that bad. He said, "John, at the end of the day," it's stuck with me ever since. He said, "We're a young country." He said, "As a country," these were his words, "we're still pooping yellow." So it's his way of saying, we're just like a baby still. Yeah. We're that young. He said, "I know, even though it'll be after my time," he said, "I know our black babies and our white babies will work this out." And that's stuck with me ever since. That's a really challenging area, and it's not being solved overnight. But his faith, his positivity that we as a country would get there just really struck me, despite all the hardship that he dealt with and the work that he did with young, challenged Indigenous men.
Well, I reckon that's not a bad chance meeting to get some good influence.
Yeah, he sticks in my mind, he really does.
You now get to write your own question in the book.
Okay.
There's a pen for you. You can write it on that side. Write your name at the top, write your question on it.
Okay, and you're not going to see this?
No, I close the book and I see it again when we open the next.
I feel like I'm in primary school, making sure no one cheats. I'm now closing the book.
Okay. So, what's next for you?
What's next? I'll head home and get some dinner, obviously, but there's a hell of a lot to do. I'm keen to remain engaged in my community, my profession as best I can for many years to come. And for me, that focus is getting our university through its change process that it's involved in at the moment, like every university in the country is, and continuing to support our team at TESB to go out and lead the charge in their own right as a team, well after I've gone in the years to come.
Well, as a TESB member, I'm looking forward to seeing it all. Mate, it's been fantastic. If you're looking for us at all, you can find The Hard Way on Apple, Spotify and YouTube. Apart from that, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
It was fantastic having you on the show.
Thank you.
And we'll see you all later. So in government, you had many highlight.
Sorry, Graham, can we just wait till
You had the worst. And you...
That was my bad. I put the thumbs up.
Okay, well, I didn't. There we go.
There we go.
Are we okay now?
All good.